Have you ever wondered why some inheritances feel more like curses than blessings? A war veteran returned home with nothing but his loyal German shepherd and was given the one thing nobody wanted, an abandoned lake called Deadwater Hollow. The townsfolk laughed. His family mocked him. But why did his uncle leave this place to him? And why did the dog keep swimming to the same dark corner of the lake, as if guarding something? What they uncovered beneath those waters would unite a broken town and change everything. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. The late autumn sky of Minnesota stretched gray and heavy, a thin mist rising from the damp earth, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wet leaves clinging to the forest floor. The cold bit through the wind, not with cruelty, but with that quiet persistence that seeps into the bones and reminds one of loneliness. Beneath that sky, John Miller walked slowly toward the small rental house at the edge of the town, his boots crunching against gravel and brittle twigs, his dog Rex trotting faithfully beside him. John Miller was 45 years old, but time had carved his face in ways that made him look both older and younger, depending on the light. His hazel hair, once thick and boyish, now carried strands of gray, especially around the temples. A thin beard with silver threads framed his jaw, not unkempt, but not neatly trimmed either, the sort of beard that spoke of a man who lived without vanity, yet valued a certain dignity. His build was strong, broad-shouldered, and though his back carried the weight of battles long finished, he moved with the steadiness of a man who had once been trained to endure. His eyes, deep brown with flecks of green, bore that distant, watchful quality common in soldiers who had seen too much and trusted too little. They were the eyes of someone who remembered what could go wrong in the space of a heartbeat. Beside him, Rex moved like a shadow cast into fur and flesh. The German shepherd was 5 years old, his coat a handsome mix of deep brown and black that gleamed when the light caught it, his ears sharp and upright, his amber eyes always scanning the world. He had the body of an athlete, powerful but not bulky, with muscles coiled beneath his sleek frame. Rex had once been trained as a military working dog, but had never deployed. Instead, he became John's companion during the later years of service and, eventually, his closest friend when John came home. The bond between them was more than man and dog. It was the wordless trust of soldiers watching each other's backs. Rex had a calm intelligence, rarely barking without reason, and when he did, it carried a gravity that made John listen immediately. John reached the crooked steps of the rental house, a cabin too worn to carry any pride, its paint peeling, the porch sagging, and the roof patched with mismatched shingles. Yet it was shelter, and he had learned never to turn his nose at shelter. He paused before entering, looking down at Rex, who had sat at the bottom step, ears twitching, watching his master with that steady gaze. John smiled faintly, though his eyes did not match the curve of his lips. "Not much, is it, buddy?" he said in a low voice, almost as if ashamed to speak too loudly. "But it's ours for now." He opened the door, the hinges creaking with a groan like an old man rising from bed. The inside smelled faintly of damp wood and stale dust. A single stove sat in the corner, rusted and tired, its iron belly waiting for logs. John dropped his duffel bag, a weathered green canvas sack with faded patches sewn at the corners, onto the floor. He had lived out of bags and footlockers for so long that the act felt almost normal, though this time there would be no orders, no commanding officer, no mission brief. Just silence. Silence was what frightened John most. On the battlefield, noise had been constant. Shouts, gunfire, engines, the thunder of mortars. Back home, silence was supposed to mean peace, but for him, it often became the stage for memory, where the mind replayed what the heart wanted to bury. Nights were the worst. In the stillness, he would dream not only of the desert, but of his boyhood, of summers spent swimming in lakes under skies that promised freedom. The water then had been cool and safe, a place where he had felt weightless before life grew heavy with duty. Now, even those dreams felt stolen, corrupted by the war's shadow. Rex padded across the wooden floor and circled once before lying near the stove. John crouched, scratching behind the dog's ears, and for a moment he allowed himself to breathe more deeply. Touch grounded him. Fur beneath his fingers was real in a way memories were not. "We'll manage," John whispered. "We've managed worse." He rose and lit a lantern. The flame flickered, casting long shadows along the cabin walls. He looked at his hands, broad, scarred, veins raised like maps of the battles he had fought. These were not the hands of a farmer or a carpenter, though he had tried such work since returning. They were hands shaped to carry rifles, to grip radios, to drag wounded comrades from danger. Civilian life felt slippery beneath them, like a tool he didn't know how to hold. People in town offered him odd jobs, chopping firewood, fixing fences, hauling supplies, but nothing steady. Some looked at him with pity, others with suspicion, as though war had made him a man half broken and unpredictable. The truth was, John felt both pity and suspicion toward himself. He pitied the boy he once was, the man who believed service would give his life clear meaning. He suspected that, somewhere along the way, he had lost the ability to belong anywhere that was not scarred or dangerous. Yet, he was too stubborn to surrender to despair. He told himself, again and again, that he would carve something out of the wilderness, even if all he had was a crumbling cabin and a loyal dog. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked, eyes alert. John turned toward the window. Outside, nothing stirred but the mist sliding low across the lake beyond the tree line. It was not yet his lake. It belonged still to another name on a deed he could not imagine, but the sight of the water pulled at him. He had been avoiding it, telling himself there was no reason to stand by those dark waters, but he knew he would go eventually. Lakes had always been his solace, the cool embrace of water, a reminder of boyhood freedom. When John finally stepped back outside, Rex at his side, he drew his coat tighter around him. They walked down the short trail that led from the cabin to the edge of the lake. The air grew sharper, filled with the scent of wet reeds and pine. The surface of Deadwater Hollow lay still, almost glassy, reflecting the dim light of the clouded sky. It was not a welcoming sight. It was heavy, silent, a void waiting. Yet John felt a stirring in his chest. For a moment, he imagined being 10 years old again, diving from a dock. Rex replaced by the memory of a different dog long gone, the world still innocent. Rex waded into the shallows, pawing at the water, then splashed playfully as if inviting John to join. John laughed softly, the sound surprising him. He crouched, dipping his hand into the lake. The cold seized his skin, jolting him awake. He thought of his uncle, the one who had left him this place, the only relative who had ever truly believed in him as a boy. The old man had once taught him to swim, told him that water carried not just the body but the soul, washing away burdens if one trusted it. Maybe that was why, when everyone else sneered at Deadwater Hollow, his uncle had chosen John to inherit it. John stood, looking across the lake. The mist shifted, revealing the far shoreline where trees leaned close, their trunks black against the dim light. He did not yet know what awaited him here, whether hardship or grace, but he felt strangely that he and Rex were meant to be here. The thought did not ease his worries about money, about work, about nights haunted by memory, yet it gave him something more dangerous and more precious, a sliver of hope. He placed a hand on Rex's head, the dog pressing close against his leg. "Looks like it's just you and me again," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "But maybe that's enough." The dog wagged his tail, the sound of water lapping against the shore answering them both. Together, they stood at the edge of Deadwater Hollow, man and dog, soldier and companion, staring into a future uncertain, but theirs to claim. The courthouse in town was one of the few buildings that still carried its old dignity. Built from pale stone and dark timber, it smelled of polish and dust, as if decades of voices lingered in the rafters. The morning sun slanted through high windows, laying bars of light across benches already filled with family members who had arrived early, dressed in their best. John Miller walked through the door with the same quiet composure he had carried into foreign war zones, though here the battlefield was family and the weapons were words sharpened by envy and pride. Martha, his older sister, stood near the front row speaking to the lawyer. Tall and lean, with auburn hair pinned into a bun, her severe profile made her look like a schoolmistress forever correcting someone's posture. She had spent years as a teacher, and her tone often suggested that her siblings were still children in her classroom. Her dress was plain navy wool, ironed to perfection, her back straight as a ruler, yet her eyes softened when she caught John's gaze, just a flicker of warmth, before she turned away to resume her conversation. David, their elder brother, leaned back in his chair with the casual dominance of a man used to his own land and cattle. He was built like the barns he managed, broad, square, weather-beaten. His beard was thick, peppered with gray, and his large hands rested on his knees like the roots of an oak tree. David had always measured success in bushels and acreage. Years of farm labor and seasons of disappointment had hardened him into a man who admired only visible productivity. War, to him, was just wasted years that produced nothing but scars. When he saw John enter, his mouth twisted into a grin that was both greeting and mockery. Sarah, their cousin, sat a few seats away. She was slender, her fair hair braided neatly down her back, her dress light brown with lace at the collar. Sarah owned a shop downtown and was known for her polite smile and her calculating eyes. She had built a reputation for courtesy that could turn cold the instant a deal soured. With her soft voice and delicate appearance, she could disarm anyone, but she missed no chance to measure value, in goods, in people, in prospects. Her glance at John was one of curiosity more than affection, like someone assessing a horse at auction. At the front of the room stood Mr. Thompson, the lawyer. He was a wiry man in his 60s, with spectacles perched on his narrow nose and a habit of clearing his throat before every sentence. His dark suit was neatly pressed but frayed at the cuffs, suggesting careful maintenance stretched thin. He held a stack of papers and addressed the family in a voice that was dry, orderly, and used to being obeyed. The reading began. The will divided property in clear terms. Martha was granted a parcel of farmland rich with orchards. David received the family farmhouse, tools, and pasture. Sarah was left bonds and a small building in town for her shop. Each bequest brought murmurs of satisfaction, shoulders relaxing, nods of approval. It was wealth that could be touched, counted, and spent. Then Mr. Thompson read the final clause. To my nephew John Miller, I leave Deadwater Hollow, together with the adjoining cabin and woodland. It is a place that meant much to me, and I believe it will mean much to him. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then came the laughter. David barked it out first, a booming sound that filled the chamber. The lake? That swamp full of mosquitoes? That's what you get for all your soldiering, John. An empty hole. Martha did not laugh. Her voice was cool, almost pitying. Uncle was fond of you, but fondness doesn't buy bread. What will you do with a hollow that no one visits? Sarah's lips curved into her practiced smile. You could sell it, she suggested sweetly. Someone might want timber or hunting land. At least you'd get a little money instead of a burden. John stood still as if under inspection. The old instinct to defend himself rose in his chest, but he forced it down. In his mind, images flickered, his uncle's weathered hands lifting him from the lake as a boy, the old man's voice saying, "Water will carry your weight if you let it." He straightened, his hazel eyes steady. "I'll keep it," he said simply. The words landed in the room like a small stone dropped into still water. His siblings shook their heads, some snickering, others shrugging. The lawyer cleared his throat. Then it is settled. The will stands as written. Papers were signed, seals pressed, and one by one the family members gathered their belongings. David clapped him on the shoulder with a force meant to sting. "Enjoy your swamp, soldier." Martha's eyes lingered on him, and though her words were stern, her tone carried a sliver of care. "Be careful with it, John. It can swallow more than you think." Sarah gave him a sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes before she turned away to whisper with another cousin. When the benches emptied, John stepped outside into the crisp air. The courthouse bell tolled noon. He walked down the steps with long strides, his jaw set. He had known what was coming, yet the sting of their scorn still burned. His uncle's gift was no accident, he told himself. The man had chosen him for a reason. Back at the cabin, Rex bounded out, tail wagging, body lean and strong in the fading light. John knelt, pressing his forehead briefly against the dog's. "It's ours," he murmured. "Deadwater Hollow. They think it's worthless, but we'll see." Rex barked sharply, then tugged at John's sleeve, pulling him toward the water. They walked down the narrow trail to the lake. The mist that morning had lifted, leaving a calm surface that mirrored the pale sky. Rex plunged into the shallows, splashing, circling, sending rings across the water. John stood at the edge, boots sinking slightly, into the mud. He crouched and let his hand break the surface. The cold ran through his skin into his bones, But instead of shivering, he felt steadied. Memories of summers long gone rose. His uncle teaching him to swim, the echo of laughter across the lake. He sat back on the bank, Rex shaking water over him in playful protest. For a moment, John allowed himself a smile. He had no land of worth, no bonds, no farmhouse to anchor him. But he had this: a stretch of water, a cabin, a loyal dog, and a memory of someone who had believed in him when others had not. It was not wealth, but it was a beginning. The cabin at Deadwater Hollow did not feel like home at first. Its roof sagged in places, and when the rain came down, water leaked through the gaps with steady drips that soaked the floorboards. John Miller stood with his sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand, nails clenched between his teeth, and looked more like a man locked in combat than a handyman. The soldier's hands were broad and strong, scarred from years of holding rifles and radios, not carpentry tools. Yet he swung the hammer anyway, patching shingles with scraps of wood scavenged from fallen barns and what little he could afford from town. Every strike echoed across the lake, and Rex, lying nearby with his head on his paws, lifted his ears as if counting the blows. When the patching was done, John turned to the well, or what had once been a well, a moss-stained ring of stone half sunk in mud, its bucket rotted and rope frayed to useless threads. John dug with a spade until blisters rose on his palms, pulling out silt and weeds, lowering himself into the damp dark until he hit water that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. His shirt clung to his back, beige fabric streaked with sweat and dirt, but when the first bucket of clear water splashed at his feet, he smiled for the first time in days. Rex barked sharply, tail wagging, as if celebrating a small victory earned by both man and dog. The days were not easy. Meals were simple, often nothing more than bread, potatoes, and the occasional rabbit that Rex flushed from the undergrowth. John planted a small patch of carrots and beans beside the cabin, kneeling in the soil with the same focus he once used to clean a rifle. Rex prowled the edge of the clearing, nose low, ears twitching, a sentinel against raccoons or wandering foxes. At night, the soldier sat on the porch with his loyal companion, staring out at the dark expanse of the lake while the crickets sang. The emptiness could have felt like exile, but Rex's steady presence made it bearable. One evening, after a long day of cutting firewood, John stripped down to his undershirt and walked to the lake. The water gleamed silver in the moonlight, cold against his skin as he waded in. He dove forward, body cutting the surface, muscles remembering what it was to swim without weight. For those few minutes he was not a soldier or a man scraping for survival. He was a boy again, free in water that did not judge him. Rex leapt in after him, sending up a spray of droplets, paddling in wide circles until John laughed aloud, the sound echoing over the hollow. They wrestled in the shallows until both were soaked and shivering, but for once their shivers were from joy, not dread. The neighbors had heard about John's return and the unusual inheritance. Some ignored him, content to let the war veteran live out his strange solitude, but not everyone. One of the first to visit was Henry Olson, a wiry man in his 50s with a shock of white hair and a face tanned by years in the logging trade. He carried himself with a quiet humility, his hands thick and calloused, his back bent slightly from decades of labor. He had lost 2 sons to the city, young men who refused to take up their father's work, and perhaps that was why he treated John with a fatherly patience. One morning, Henry arrived at the cabin with a wagon stacked with split logs. "Winter won't care you're new here," he said in a gravelly voice. "Better be ready." John thanked him, humbled, and Rex wagged his tail, sniffing the man before accepting him with a short bark. Later came Mary Thompson, a widow in her early 40s who lived 2 miles east of the hollow. She was tall, slender, with dark hair streaked by early gray, her skin pale from long hours indoors. Mary carried a basket of bread and jars of preserves, her hands trembling slightly when she set them down. She was kind but cautious, her voice soft, as though afraid to disturb something fragile. Her husband had died in a mill accident years ago, and since then she had raised 2 children alone. "You'll find the town slow to trust," she warned gently, "but not cruel, at least not always." Her eyes lingered on Rex, who wagged politely, and then on John, who gave her a respectful nod, grateful for the offering. There was also Samuel Wright, the blacksmith. Broad-shouldered, bald at the crown, his arms dark and shiny with soot, Samuel was known for his booming laugh and blunt tongue. He arrived one afternoon carrying a small iron stove door under his arm. "Heard yours won't close," he said, stepping into the cabin without asking. His grin was lopsided, his teeth crooked, but his eyes were kind. "Figure you'd burn the whole place down if I didn't fix it." John chuckled, surprised at the warmth of the gesture. Samuel worked quickly, Rex circling his legs curiously. And when the job was done, he slapped John on the shoulder with a force that nearly staggered him. "Now you won't freeze. You're welcome." Bit by bit, the hollow that once seemed abandoned began to feel less lonely. John would sit at the edge of the lake after long days, watching the sun bleed gold into the water, thinking of the family who had mocked him. They had houses, orchards, and bonds. He had a leaking roof and a dog that trusted him without question. Yet, as Rex nudged his knee and the sound of neighbors' wagons creaked faintly along the distant road, John realized he was not as forsaken as he thought. The hard days continued, roofs still leaked, hands still blistered, and nights still carried silence heavy enough to wake him from shallow sleep. But there were also small mercies: a loaf of bread left by Mary, a bundle of wood stacked quietly at the porch by Henry, a fixed stove door from Samuel, and always Rex bounding through the clearing, splashing in the lake, his joyful bark cutting through the stillness, like a reminder that even in hardship, life could still be good. One night, as John dried his shirt by the fire after another swim, Rex curled beside him, damp fur steaming in the warmth. John leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the logs crackle. "We're not rich," he said softly, as if confessing a secret. "But maybe we're not alone either." Rex thumped his tail, a quiet agreement. For the first time since his return, John let himself believe that the lake might be more than an inheritance scorned. It might be a beginning worth fighting for. The morning was cool and still, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Mist drifted low across Deadwater Hollow, curling like smoke over the mirror of water. John Miller stood at the cabin porch with a mug of bitter coffee in his hand, his beige shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the fabric still damp from yesterday's labor. Beside him, Rex sat with his ears pricked, eyes fixed on the lake as if sensing something hidden below. The German shepherd had been restless since dawn, pacing along the bank and giving low growls whenever ripples stirred the glassy surface. Rex was 5 years old, but carried himself with the alertness of a veteran, his black and brown coat gleaming even in the weak light. Suddenly, the dog leapt into the water with a splash, barking sharply as he swam out toward the center. John set down his mug and followed at once, boots crunching the shore before he waded into the chill. The lake was cold enough to numb his legs, but he pressed forward, his breath quickening. Rex barked again, circling around something half buried in the mud beneath the shallows. John reached down, fingers meeting rough wood softened by rot. With effort, he hauled a sodden crate to the bank, its surface mottled with moss and waterlogged nails rusted to powder. The lid cracked under his grip, and a smell of damp parchment and mildew rose as he pried it open. Inside were bundles wrapped in oilcloth, fragile with age. He laid them out carefully on the grass. The first package revealed a leather-bound journal, its cover brittle, the edges eaten by time. The second contained folded sheets of yellowed paper, maps, drawn with an almost obsessive hand. John sat back on his heels, the breath catching in his chest. The pages told stories in faded ink, troop movements from the Civil War, scrawled notes about Morrison's cache, and markings near the very lake where he now lived. John traced one line on the map with his finger, his scarred hands trembling. A mark shaped like an X sat not far from where the cabin now stood. Another note in neat script spoke of wagons carrying Confederate gold hidden in the northern hills, with shipments diverted and buried when Union patrols cut supply lines. The journal's handwriting was careful, the script of a man both educated and secretive. Some passages were crossed out, others left half-finished, but the implication was clear. There had once been a fortune buried near Deadwater Hollow. John's heart pounded with conflicting emotions. On one hand, the discovery stirred something fierce inside him, possibility, hope, the thought that maybe this inheritance was not scorned after all. But alongside that, hope came fear. Wealth, if true, would not remain secret. People would come for it. and John, who had lived with silence and scars, knew well how greed could twist men. He sat staring at the papers, hearing the gentle lap of waves at the shore, and wondered whether this was a gift from his uncle, or a burden heavier than all the others. Rex barked once more, wagging his tail, as if proud of his find. John ruffled the dog's wet fur, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You always did know better than me," he murmured. As he gathered the fragile documents, the sound of wagon wheels reached him from the dirt road. He stood quickly, tucking the journal under his arm. A small cart came into view, pulled by a tired-looking mule. On the driver's seat sat Jacob Ellis, a farmer from the south side of town. Jacob was in his early 40s, tall but thin from hard years, with a sun-darkened face and a straw hat pulled low. His beard was patchy, his hands cracked, and his shoulders slumped with the weight of responsibility. He had lost his wife to illness 3 winters ago, and now raised 2 daughters on his own. Despite hardship, Jacob was known for his honesty and stubborn decency. "Morning, John," Jacob called, his voice rough but friendly. "Thought I'd bring by some seed potatoes. Figured you could use them." His eyes glanced toward the damp bundle at John's side, though he said nothing. John nodded, thankful. "Appreciate it," he replied, shifting slightly to shield the papers. Jacob climbed down, handing over the sack with a weary smile. "Folks talk, you know," he added. "Say you're fixing up the old place. It's good someone's making use of it. Hollow's too quiet otherwise." John gave a small smile in return, though his thoughts churned. The kindness of neighbors warmed him, but now he carried a secret that made him wary. After Jacob departed, the mule cart creaking down the road, John sat again by the lake with Rex. He unfolded a page of the map, tracing the lines by lamplight that evening. Each mark spoke of tunnels, caches, hidden shipments, more than just rumors, but history buried under water and time. The fire crackled in the stove Samuel Wright had fixed, casting a warm glow against the cabin walls. Rex lay curled at John's feet, damp fur finally dry, breathing steady. John turned another page in the journal and read words dated 1863. "The Hollow will keep its secrets until men are desperate enough to drown for them." The sentence made him shiver. His uncle must have known about these documents, perhaps even meant for John to find them. But why leave them buried instead of revealing them to the world? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling beams patched with Henry Olsen's lumber. Outside, the night pressed in, the lake whispering against its shore. The soldier in him saw the danger first. Men with guns, strangers knocking at doors, greed spilling into violence. But another part, the boy who had once swum carefree summers in these waters, saw something else. He saw the chance to build more than survival, to repair the cabin, to repay the kindness of neighbors, to bring something lasting to a town that had long forgotten him. Rex stirred, lifting his head to look at John with steady amber eyes. John stroked the dog's fur and let out a long breath. "This place isn't done with us yet," he said quietly. He closed the journal, set it gently on the table, and stared into the fire until the flames blurred. The Hollow had given him a secret, and now he had to decide what to do with it. Word traveled quickly in small towns, faster than the wagons that rattled down dirt roads, or the letters carried by the postman. Within a week of John Miller's discovery, whispers began to coil through the streets of the town like smoke. Men leaning against storefronts muttered about treasure. Women at the bakery lowered their voices as they mentioned Deadwater Hollow. Children dared each other to ride their bicycles down the road that led to the cabin where the war veteran and his German shepherd lived alone. The rumor had shape and teeth now, gold hidden in the lake, Civil War riches guarded by shadows. At first, John ignored it. He had seen rumors before, seen how quickly people could build mountains out of dust. But one evening as he walked into town to buy nails and lamp oil, he noticed the way men's eyes lingered on him. Some narrowed with suspicion, others gleamed with something closer to hunger. Their stares followed him as he passed, and by the time he reached the hardware store, he knew the gossip had turned into something heavier. Behind the counter stood Harold Green, a heavy-set man with a round face and thinning brown hair combed across his bald spot. His cheeks were ruddy, his hands thick, the nails perpetually dirty from hauling crates. Harold had owned the shop for 20 years and was known for his genial laugh and habit of chatting too long with customers. But today his laugh was gone. He leaned closer as John set the nails on the counter. "You be careful," Harold murmured, his small eyes darting toward the door. "There's men asking about you. Don't say I said so, but they ain't the sort you want near your cabin." John nodded once, the words pressing against his ribs like a warning bell. He paid, thanked Harold, and walked out into the fading light. Rex padded at his side, head high, ears flicking at every sound. By the time they reached the edge of the hollow, the shadows of evening seemed deeper than usual. That night, Rex growled, low, rumbling, steady. John rose from his cot and peered through the window. A figure moved near the tree line, too far to make out clearly, but close enough to set the dog bristling. John stepped outside, rifle in hand, his breath white in the cold air. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady. The figure froze, then melted back into the dark without a word. Rex barked once, sharp as a crack. John stood listening until silence folded back over the hollow. The days grew heavier. Strangers lingered on the roads nearby, men John had never seen before, thin faces shadowed by hats, boots too new for honest labor, voices clipped and cautious when they passed. Some came under pretense of hunting or fishing, but their eyes slid toward the lake more often than toward game. Rex never relaxed around them. His hackles rose, his growl steady, and once he lunged so fiercely that a man stumbled backward into the brush and cursed before retreating. Yet, it wasn't all suspicion. There were neighbors who stood quietly by him. Henry Olson, the wiry logger, stopped by with another load of wood and lingered longer than usual. His weathered face, lined like an old map, carried concern. "Men'll sniff around if they think there's gold," he said simply, leaning on his axe. "But don't forget, some of us won't let this hollow fall to them." His words were plain, but the look in his pale blue eyes held a promise stronger than law. Mary Thompson, the widow, arrived one afternoon with a loaf of bread still warm in its cloth. Her slender hands trembled slightly as she set it on John's table. "People are talking," she admitted, her dark hair streaked with gray catching the light. "But don't let them steal your peace. This place, it gave me comfort once when I walked by after my husband died. Don't let them take that from you." Her voice was soft but resolute, and John felt something in his chest loosen at the kindness. Samuel Wright, the blacksmith with the booming laugh, showed up one evening carrying a bundle of iron nails. He dropped them on the porch with a clatter. "You'll need these," he said, grinning through crooked teeth. "Better make your cabin tight as a drum. If anyone tries anything, they'll find out you're not a man to cross." His shoulders shook with a chuckle, but his eyes, dark and steady, revealed he meant every word. Still, the tension wore on John. Nights were long, restless, and heavy with silence. Often he would strip down to his undershirt and walk with Rex to the lake. They slipped into the cold water together, swimming out under the pale wash of the moon. The chill bit into his skin, but the rhythm of his strokes soothed him, the water carrying away the heaviness for a time. Rex swam in wide arcs beside him, ears flat, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. For those moments, the hollow belonged only to them, not to rumor, not to greed. One midnight, John floated on his back, the stars scattered above him, the dog paddling nearby. The water lapped gently at his ears, muffling the world. He closed his eyes and thought of his uncle's voice. Water carries more than weight. It carries truth. He wondered what truth this lake meant to reveal, and whether he was strong enough to bear it. When he returned to shore, dripping and breathless, Rex shook himself dry and leaned against John's leg. The warmth of the dog's body pressed through the cold. John looked out across the hollow, its surface dark and calm. Somewhere beyond the tree line, shadows waited. But in that moment, with loyal eyes watching him and the kindness of a few good neighbors in his heart, John felt a flicker of strength. The world might circle him with greed, but he would not face it alone. The lake looked darker at night, its surface a black mirror broken only by the shifting of the wind. John Miller stood barefoot on the bank, his beige shirt clinging damp against his chest. The journal and maps lay inside the cabin on the table, weighed down by a lantern, and his mind returned to their drawings again and again. If there was truly something beneath Deadwater Hollow, then it had been resting there longer than any of his family's fortunes. The thought gnawed at him. He rolled his sleeves higher, knelt at the water's edge, and Rex pressed close, whining softly. The German shepherd's amber eyes gleamed in the moonlight, his brown and black coat damp from pacing the shoreline. John set a hand on the dog's strong neck. "If I don't come up fast, you know what to do," he muttered. Rex gave a low bark, half warning, half agreement. The first plunge stole John's breath. Minnesota waters in early spring carried the bite of winter still, and the shock gripped his chest. He forced his body down, arms cutting through the murk. Mud swirled, and reeds clutched at his legs like fingers. Twice his boots sank into the silt so deep he nearly lost his balance, panic clawing at him until he yanked himself free. He broke the surface gasping, Rex barking furiously, pacing the bank as if ready to dive after him. On the second night, he tied a rope around his waist, the other end fastened to a sturdy pine. Rex planted his paws against the earth, teeth gripping the rope, pulling whenever John tugged twice in signal. It was clumsy, but it gave John a lifeline in the blackness below. The water pressed colder the deeper he went, light vanishing, silence deafening. Each dive ended with lungs burning, muscles aching, and Rex dragging him back as he burst into the night air. For days the search became a ritual. John would rise before dawn, eat a crust of bread, stretch his sore shoulders, and step into the hollow. Neighbors like Henry Olson or Mary Thompson sometimes caught glimpses of him dripping wet and shaking as he carried driftwood back to the cabin. They asked questions, but John gave only shrugs. Rumors already swirled too freely. The fewer who knew, the safer it was. One evening, when the clouds had cleared and stars burned bright, John slipped under again. The rope pulled taut as Rex braced himself on shore. John's hands sank through muck, feeling nothing but stone and weed. Then, with his palm, he struck against something different, edges squared, not shaped by nature. His heart thundered. He brushed mud aside, and there it was. A corner of wood, rough and heavy, older than anything it should have been. He hooked his arm around it, kicking hard to rise, but the chest did not yield easily. It was waterlogged and sunk deep. Panic rose sharp as his lungs screamed for air. He yanked the rope once, twice, desperate, and Rex heaved from the shore. John burst upward in a spray, coughing lake water, his vision flashing. Rex barked, wildly hauling until John dragged himself onto the mudbank, chest heaving. The taste of silt and iron clung to his tongue. The next day, John returned with more resolve. He lashed the rope directly to the chest, knotting it tight despite the numbness in his fingers. Dive after dive, he worked, loosening the silt that had held it prisoner for decades. Rex dug his claws into the earth, muscles straining, pulling against the weight as if he understood the stakes. Finally, with a groan muffled by water, the chest shifted free. Together, man and dog hauled it inch by inch until it scraped against the shore. John collapsed beside it, soaked to the bone, his body trembling from exhaustion and cold. Rex leapt into the shallows, splashing circles around him, tail wagging in triumph. John laughed hoarsely, a sound that cracked the night open and splashed the dog in return. For a moment, danger fell away. He was not a scarred veteran or a man fighting suspicion and hunger. He was a boy again, alive in the lake that had once carried his summers. The chest sat heavy in the mud, sealed but intact, its iron fittings rusted and wood swollen. John laid a hand on it, breathing hard, his heart caught between dread and wonder. Whatever lay inside, the hollow had kept it safe through years of silence. Now it was his to face. The chest sat heavy in the cabin, its wood swollen with years of water and its iron hinges nearly eaten away by rust. John Miller had not yet opened it. Something in his gut told him that once the chest gave up its secrets, the hollow would never be the same. He left it sealed, setting his rifle within reach, and waited for the storm he knew would come. The whispers in town had grown louder, sharper. Men he did not know lingered in doorways when he walked past. Even Mary Thompson had warned him gently, her pale face drawn with worry, that there were strangers asking after him. It was near midnight when the storm broke. Rex growled first, his ears flat, body tense, his amber eyes fixed on the tree line. Then came the crunch of boots on frozen earth, more than one pair, approaching from the woods. John eased the lantern low and checked the rifle. The cabin, patched with Henry Olson's timber, was no fortress, but it was his ground, and he would not give it easily. 5 men emerged from the shadows, their breath ghosting in the cold. They carried shotguns and pistols, one man hefting a crowbar. The leader, a broad-shouldered brute with a trimmed black beard and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. His name was Marcus Hale, a drifter known for running card games and smuggling liquor through the county. His cold, dark eyes were greedy, and his smile carried no warmth. "Evening, soldier," Marcus called, his voice smooth but edged. "Word is you've pulled something out of the hollow. Thought we'd come help you share it." Behind him, the others fanned out. One was lanky, red-haired, with missing teeth and a laugh too quick, like the hiss of a snake. Another was thick in the waist, with small eyes sunk deep in a fleshy face, gripping his shotgun as though it was both weapon and crutch. The younger pair, no more than 20, shifted nervously but kept their pistols raised. They were farm boys gone astray, lured by promise of gold. John stepped onto the porch, rifle steady in his scarred hands. His beige shirt clung damp to his shoulders, his jaw set. "Turn around," he said evenly. "There's nothing here for you?" Marcus chuckled low. "See, that's where you're wrong. That chest of yours doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to whoever can keep it." Before John could answer, Rex lunged forward, teeth bared, his bark splitting the night. The men flinched, one firing a wild shot into the air. The crack echoed across the hollow, birds shrieking from the trees. John's instincts, honed by years of war, took hold. He fired once, a warning round into the dirt at Marcus's boots. "Next one's higher," he said coldly. Chaos exploded. Marcus swung the crowbar toward the porch rail, splintering wood. The heavy man with the shotgun tried to flank the cabin, but Rex met him with a snarl, jaws snapping, driving him back against a tree. The red-haired man fired at the roof, sending shingles scattering. John dropped. Low squeezed off another shot, grazing the man's arm and sending him cursing into the shadows. It might have ended bloody and alone had it not been for the sudden clatter of more boots, louder this time, and the ringing voice of Sheriff Bradley. "That's enough!" he barked. Lanterns bobbed through the trees, and a dozen townsfolk emerged behind him. Henry Olson, with his axe over his shoulder, Samuel Wright, gripping an iron bar, Jacob Ellis with his weathered face grim beneath his straw hat. Even Mary was there, clutching a lantern, her jaw tight despite her trembling hands. Sheriff Bradley was a tall, weathered man in his 50s, his mustache silver, his coat worn but neat. His face was square, lined by years of keeping order in a town that often tested patience. He held his revolver steady, his gray eyes fixed on Marcus. "Drop it," he ordered. "You're done here." Marcus sneered, his scar catching the lantern light. "This isn't over, lawman. That gold ain't yours to guard." But he saw the rifles raised behind Bradley, the iron glinting in Samuel's fists, the steady glare of men who had cut timber and tilled soil their whole lives. He spat into the dirt, motioned to his men, and slunk back into the dark, muttering curses. The hollow rang with silence after they left, broken only by Rex's sharp barks and the ragged breathing of men and women who had stood their ground. Bradley lowered his revolver, turning to John. "You gave us warning," he said, his voice even. "We came because we won't see this place torn apart by greed." John looked at the sheriff, then at the neighbors gathered under the moonlight, the same people who had brought him wood, bread, iron nails, and seed potatoes. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something unfamiliar. Trust. Rex pressed against his leg, tail wagging slowly. John reached down to ruffle the dog's fur, his hand steady now. That night, Deadwater Hollow echoed with more than gunshots. It held the sound of voices raised together, of boots stamping against frost, of a community reminding itself that shadows only rule when men stand apart. The chest sat in the middle of John Miller's cabin, its weight pressing against the floorboards, as though it carried not just gold, but the years of silence that had shrouded it. The iron hinges had rusted almost to dust, and the wood smelled of lake water and rot. Yet when John pried it open with the help of Sheriff Bradley and a few steady hands, the inside revealed something that caught every breath in the room. Stacks of gold bars wrapped in oilcloth, coins that gleamed faintly even in the dim lantern light, and bundles of brittle documents sealed with wax. The air felt charged, as if history itself had been released back into the night. John's heart thudded, but his jaw stayed firm. Rex stood beside him, hackles half raised as though he too sensed the weight of what they had uncovered. Around them stood the neighbors who had come to help, their eyes wide, their faces caught between awe and disbelief. Samuel Wright let out a low whistle, his burly arms folded across his chest. "Well, by God," he said, "that's more money than this town's ever seen." Sheriff Bradley leaned down, lifting one of the documents carefully, his weathered brow furrowed. "These are old deeds, contracts, Civil War records. Whoever buried this didn't just hide treasure, they tried to preserve history." His voice was steady, but his gray eyes met John's with unspoken concern. The room was silent for a long while. Then Mary Thompson, her dark hair pulled back, her pale hands gripping her shawl tight, whispered what everyone else was thinking. "What will you do with it, John?" For a moment, John saw his siblings' sneers, heard their laughter echoing in the town hall when the will had left him nothing but a broken cabin and a dead lake. He could almost feel David's smugness, Sarah's thinly veiled contempt. Gold enough to silence them forever sat within reach. His calloused hand brushed one of the bars, cold and heavy. Then he pulled it back. "I'll do what Uncle wanted," he said quietly. "I'll keep this place alive, but not for me, for all of us." That decision marked the beginning of something the town had never expected. Over the next weeks, plans were laid. John refused to lock the treasure away in his cabin, where more thieves might come. Instead, he brought the townsfolk together in the church hall, under the worn rafters that had sheltered them through storms and funerals alike. There, by lantern light, they spread the documents and counted the gold under Sheriff Bradley's watchful eyes. Voices rose, arguments flared. Some wanted to sell the gold outright, divide the shares, pay off debts that had crushed families for generations. Others worried about lawsuits, about distant relatives of Jasper Miller, or opportunists from outside swooping in with claims. Through it all, John listened, his hazel hair damp with sweat, the silver in his beard catching the lamplight. Finally he stood, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "This gold won't heal if we tear it apart. It'll heal if we build with it. Uncle Jasper left me this lake because he knew it was part of me. But he also knew it was part of you. Deadwater Hollow belongs to the town." There was silence, then a murmur of agreement, swelling into nods and whispers. Mary pressed a hand to her chest. Samuel slammed his fist against the table in support. Even Harold Green, the heavy-set shopkeeper with thinning hair, who had always been cautious with money, found himself nodding. The first project was the school. The old one sagged at its foundations, the roof patched more with tarps than shingles. With the gold, they bought lumber and hired carpenters. Children watched wide-eyed as new beams rose against the sky. A teacher named Anna Wallace arrived from the next county, drawn by the promise of something hopeful. She was in her early 30s, tall and willowy, with auburn hair she kept in a loose bun and kind, intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles. Anna carried herself with quiet dignity, shaped by years of teaching in underfunded schools, and when she saw the fresh walls rising, tears filled her green eyes. "This," she told John softly, "is what gold should be for." The second project was work. Men who had spent winters idle now found wages clearing brush, building docks, repairing roads around the hollow. Rex trotted among them like a guardian, tail high, his deep bark warning off any stranger who came sniffing. Women formed committees to distribute food and clothing to families hardest hit by the last harsh season. Even Sarah and David, once dismissive, had no choice but to watch as the hollow grew into a center of life rather than a ruin. Through it all, John worked harder than any of them. He swung hammers, hauled stone, waded into the lake with ropes to guide new piers. Sweat streaked his shirt, his scarred arms never still. Yet, what struck people most was not his labor, but his humility. When men pressed coins into his hands, calling him hero, he shook his head. "It isn't mine," he said. "It never was." One evening, Sheriff Bradley visited as the sun dipped behind the hills. The sheriff's silver mustache twitched as he studied the new school's roofline. "You could have taken it, Miller. No one would have stopped you. Why didn't you?" John looked across the water, where Rex splashed after a stick thrown by laughing children. His voice was quiet. "Because if war taught me anything, it's that you can't carry gold into the grave, but you can leave behind something that lasts." Bradley nodded once, respect deep in his lined face. As summer edged in, Deadwater Hollow transformed. Where once there had been whispers of curses and greed, there were now songs of children echoing across the water, laughter rolling with the breeze. markets sprang up along the new dock, selling fish, tools, and fresh bread. The lake was no longer a burden, it was a heartbeat. One golden evening, as the horizon burned with orange and red, John stripped off his shirt and dove into the lake. The cold bit at him, but joy welled up like it had when he was a boy. Rex leapt in after him, churning the water with his powerful strokes. Together they swam, splashing, laughter carrying across the surface. Villagers gathered at the shore, their cheers rising as the veteran and his dog cut through the water. For the first time in years, John smiled without weight. He understood then that the true treasure was not the gold locked in vaults or the deeds filed in records. It was this: a place reborn, memories rekindled, a community bound not by greed but by trust. Deadwater Hollow, once called a dead lake, now glowed with life. In the end, the story of John Miller and his loyal dog Rex was never just about a hidden chest or the glitter of gold. It was about how a man scarred by war and worn down by hardship could rise again, not by keeping treasure, but by giving it away. Deadwater Hollow, once called cursed and forgotten, became a place of light because one man chose love over greed, and a community chose unity over fear. Perhaps that is how God works among us, not in thunder or fire, but in quiet choices of kindness, in loyal companions who never leave our side, and in neighbors who show up when the night is darkest. Miracles are often disguised as hard work, courage, and the faith to believe that broken things can be made whole again. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, what treasure has God placed in your life that could bless others? Is it your time, your words, your strength, or simply your presence? Use it. Share it. For the true riches are found not in gold, but in love given freely. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more. May God bless you and your loved ones with strength, peace, and unending grace.